Hola, ¿cómo están ustedes? Hoy vamos a estar haciendo las monarcas españoles. Línea de sucesión. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be taking a look at the Spanish monarchs line of succession, the long-awaited Spanish monarchs line of succession. We're going to be starting in the year 1469, during the height of the kingdoms of Aragon y Castile, or Aragon and Castile, going all the way to the present day with King Felipe el VI, Felipe VI of Spain. We're going to be going through all the dynasties that ruled over the various time periods, including the inbred Habsburgs, to the French Bourbons, to even the fascist dictatorship of Francisco Franco, and everything in between. So, with that all said and done, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Smash that like button for me, because we are going to get into the Spanish monarchs line of succession. Let's go! All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the Spanish monarchs line of succession, as I just previously said. So we're starting in 1469. Let me whip out my laser pointer here. And we're going to basically be covering the entirety of the United Spanish monarchs. Now, I'm not going all the way back to the previous Spanish-like kingdoms, because for those of you who don't know, Spain was previously, before 1469, mainly made up of several smaller kingdoms like León, Castilla, Aragon, and things like that. Several small kingdoms, until they all eventually united into one Spain, which is where we're starting here. Now in 1469 it's a little bit different, but here's how this video works. So I'm going to be showing you the monarch. It's going to go through the various years and the various monarchs that were reigning during the time periods. So 1469 to 2023, all of these monarchs. So here is the format. So the formatting's pretty simple. If you haven't seen any of my other videos, I did line of succession videos on the English, British, Scottish, Holy Roman Empire, and the French monarchs. So go check all those out if you haven't already, but this is the Spanish monarchs. So in the top middle part we have the year, and you'll see it when we play out here. The kingdom / the royal house will be on each end here. I have the kingdom right here and the royal house over here. Now the kingdom does change throughout the time, because during the late second millennium, Spain was constantly getting taken over by and having revolutions. So you'll see that change. The royal house, whatever it may be. Currently the house is Bourbon, so we'll have the Bourbon symbol over here. So the monarch's going to be in the middle. That's going to be the big picture. First in line to the throne will be right here. So the heir apparent, heir presumptive, whatever it is, whether it's their eldest son or, their whatever, the next in line to the throne. And then over here is second in line to the throne. So we'll get into the rules of succession. Spain's succession rules are very simple, because it's pretty much been the same for the past 500 years. So you'll see how that is. So we're going to start here with 1469. Now, 1469 is a little bit different, because this is allegedly when Spain was created, was 1469. How did I come up with that year? Well, I did a quick Siri asked Siri when Spain was founded, and he said 1469. So here we go. Let me ask him right now. When was Spain founded?
Spain was founded the 19th of October, 1469.
Now, it says Spain was founded in 1469. However, the kingdoms were not one. There were two kingdoms that existed on the Iberian Peninsula in 1469. Well, actually like four. There was Naples and Portugal too, but we don't really count those. There was Castilla and Aragon, known in English as Aragon and Castile. So these guys are very interesting, because this is Castile is mainly what became Spain. Aragon kind of clashed with it, although the line traces through the Aragon is the more senior line. Now, this is the symbol for Aragon, and this is the symbol for Castile. They both existed separately until 1516, so for the rest of the 1400s and the early 1500s, they are still separate. However, they will share rulers here shortly, and you'll see how they come to unite. So in 1469, they each have independent kings for each other. Now, it's kind of interesting because this man here was the second to last independent monarch of Aragon. And he is King Juan II. King Juan II of Aragon. Now, he is the father of the famous Ferdinand, King Ferdinand and Isabella, who ruled Aragon and Castile, which we'll get to here soon. This is the father of Ferdinand, and this is the father of Isabella, the first. Now, a little bit of background on these guys. Juan II originally became king of Aragon back in 1458 upon the death of his brother Alfonso V, who passed away in 1458. So by this time in 1469, Juan II had already been king of Aragon for like 11 years at this point. And he's still got quite a few to go. He ends up dying in 1479, but we'll get to that in a second. The reigning monarch of Castile at this time is a man by the name of King Henry IV. So he originally took the throne in 1454. Or 1464. 1454. So he's only got a couple years left. This all holds true for the 1470s. And I didn't show their heirs just because they're independent kingdoms. I'll show the heirs once they get in line here. But these two kingdoms are what united to form Spain, or the Spanish Empire, as you'll see in a second. So 1474, tragic strikes in Castile because King... what's his name? I forgot his name. King Henry IV dies without any sons. However, he's got a daughter to take the throne after him, and that is Queen Isabella. So Isabella, or Queen Isabel, as she's known in Castile, officially becomes the Queen Regnant of Castile in 1475. So she's ruling Castile at the same time that Juan II is ruling in Aragon. So she's going to start out kind of ruling separately in Castile. Now, 1479, Juan II dies, Aragon. So then his eldest son becomes King Ferdinand II of Aragon, or Fernando, as he's known in Spanish. So Fernando II, so this is the famous Ferdinand and Isabel. Now, the reason these two kingdoms end up uniting with each other is because these two individuals end up marrying. Okay? So that means that their kids are going to inherit both titles of Castile and Aragon. They're potential kids. They haven't had kids yet, but they're going to inherit both kingdoms because Ferdinand is the king of Aragon, and Isabella is the queen regnant of Castile. But she's also the queen consort over in Aragon, and Ferdinand is the consort in Castile. So she already holds a royal position in Aragon anyway, because she's the consort in Aragon, but is the queen regnant in Castile. So these two are the ones that funded Christopher Columbus's voyage to the sea. They're known as the Catholic monarchs. Very influential. They're the ones that ended the Reconquista, and the Spanish Inquisition takes place during their reign. So very influential monarchs, some of the greatest dual reign you'll ever see. Now, people think they reigned together. They did not actually reign together in a sense that they ruled over the same kingdom, because Castile and Aragon were still different kingdoms during their reigns. It was just not Spain yet. They ruled over both of them separately. Ferdinand did not rule over Castile, and Isabella did not rule over Aragon. They just ruled together in a sense, but Ferdinand had power in Aragon and Isabella had power in Castile. I want to make that clear because a lot of people get confused with that and think that they both reigned Spain, but they did not. It did not unite until 1516. So the rest of the 1480s happened. 1492 is when Christopher Columbus sails the ocean blue, as you guys should know, and they fund the voyage. His hat looks like Christopher Columbus's, but that's besides the point. So they're going to take us into the 1500s now. So in 1504, the Queen of Castile, Isabella the First, dies. Now she's Isabella the First because we're going to have another queen named Isabella later on, way like 300 years from now, in the 1800s. But 1504, Isabella of Castile dies. Now Ferdinand is still alive. He continues to rule in Aragon, but they have a child, or a couple children, but they don't have any sons. They have one daughter named Juana, or Joanna the Mad, as she's known as. So this is Joanna the Mad. Now, she's ruling, she becomes Queen Regnant of Castile. Okay? Queen Regnant of Castile in 1505, 1504, when her mother dies. Now, her father, Ferdinand, is still ruling in Aragon and will for the next, 11 years. But Joanna the Mad is currently Queen Regnant of Castile, while her father rules in Aragon. But allegedly, when her father dies, she's going to become Queen of Aragon, and Castile and Aragon are going to unite. But as long as Ferdinand's still alive, Castile and Aragon are going to be separate kingdoms still. I skipped 1506 for some reason, but in 1506, she kind of reigned jointly with her husband, Felipe. But Philip, her husband, is kind of interesting. He was not really the reigning monarch, so I didn't put him on here. But he did play a big role in Castile, and he actually was the son of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. Now, Maximilian I outlived him, but Joanna the Mad and Philip did have a son in 1500 named Charles, or Carlos. So not only was she Queen of Castile and about to inherit the titles of Aragon when her dad dies, but she also married the heir to the Holy Roman Empire throne. Her husband is going to become Holy Roman Emperor. However, he dies in 1506. But that means that her son will eventually rule over all of Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, which is insane. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So, what is going on here? Oh, we have 1505, 1507. I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, that's how we do it there. So, this all holds true until 1516. In 1516, I believe, both of these individuals, Joanna the Mad and Ferdinand, both die in 1516. Now, the throne of Aragon was supposed to pass to Joanna the Mad, but instead, because she's dead, it's going to pass straight from Ferdinand's from him to his grandson. Although previously, yes, okay. So it's going to pass to his grandson, and then it's going to pass to Joanna's son. Castile's going to pass to them. So by the time we get to 1517, we now have the previous royal houses are now just not existent. Now, previously, Ferdinand had been part of the House of Barcelona, and Joanna the Mad was also part of the House of Barcelona, but her father's side was part of the House of Trastamara. Now, she marries into the Habsburg family, which was the family that had been ruling in the Holy Roman Empire for a couple decades at that point. Or actually, it goes way back to the 1290s in the Holy Roman Empire. But by the time we get to 1517, her son, Carlos, becomes King Carlos I, Carlos el Primero of España. So now we officially get the Kingdom of Spain. It's finally a thing. Now, this is the symbol of the House of Habsburg because Carlos I was part of the House of Habsburg. Now, he's not Holy Roman Emperor yet. He's just King of Spain at this point. His grandfather, Maximilian I, is going to live until 1519. So his heirs at this point are pretty interesting. So we're going to figure out who they are here. So first, he doesn't have any kids at this point. He's 17 years old. He doesn't have any kids yet. However, the first in line to the throne is his younger brother, Ferdinand. Now, as you can see there, Ferdinand is the second son of Philip, the father of. But they all were kids of Joanna the Mad, so that was the second son of Joanna the Mad. So that's kind of how you get that. Now the rules. Now you're probably wondering why we got a woman here. Now, differently from the Holy Roman Empire in France, which follow agnatic Salic law, Spain's system of succession is pretty straightforward. It's been the same since this time, and it still is today, every single time. Women are allowed to inherit the throne in Spain. Spain follows male preference primogeniture, which is the system of succession that Spain follows. Now, what this means is, obviously, firstborn son takes precedence. Firstborn son is next in line. Now, male preference primogeniture allows the throne to pass through females if there are no sons available. So basically, if Carlos I was to have a daughter, she would become first in line over everybody else. But if he had a son, no matter how old the son is always going to take precedence over the female. However, if the female is more senior than a male is, the female will take precedence. If it's on the same generation, though, as long as that female has brothers, she will not be inheriting the throne. Only if females were allowed. Now only if the females were the only ones left. And that's kind of what happened in the UK, because the United Kingdom and Britain followed male preference primogeniture as well. That happened with Queen Elizabeth II when her father, George VI, died without any sons. He had two daughters, and the eldest daughter, Elizabeth II, became queen. And that's how it happens. So that is why we are going to have females on this chart, on this list here. So Carlos II, or Carlos I of Spain, from the House of Habsburg, his heir is his brother Ferdinand. And then his second heir is his sister Eleanor. Now Eleanor is actually older than both Carlos and Ferdinand. Now he's actually Charles, but I'm calling him by his Spanish name because this is a Spanish video. So he's going to be Carlos. All the Charleses are going to be Carlos. All of the Ferdinands are going to be Fernando. That's just how it is. So Eleanor of Austria is her name. And she was actually born in 1498. These guys were both born in the 1500s. He was born in 1503. But she was born in 1498. So she's actually older, Eleanor of Austria. But that's just how it is. In 1519, Carlos I becomes Holy Roman Emperor because his grandfather, Maximilian I, dies in 1519. So the title of Holy Roman Emperor traces down to him. Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. So he's Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. Carlos I of Spain. Carlos I of Spain ends up ruling all of Spain and all of the Holy Roman Empire and all of the overseas possessions that they have, because this is the 1500s. This is crazy. This is also the time that Hernan Cortés is taking over the Aztec Empire in North America. So that happens during his reign as well. But he ends up ruling more land in Europe than anyone had since Charlemagne. Charlemagne, the great emperor of the Franks, was the last person to rule as much land as Carlos I. So he's basically the Charlemagne of the 1500s. And in a sense that he rules all that power. So he decides by the time he dies, he's going to do something about it. But we'll get into that when we get into that. Now, he doesn't end up having any kids until 1526. 1526, no, he doesn't have any kids. Eleanor. So his brother Ferdinand has a daughter in 1526. And her name is Elizabeth of Habsburg. So she was born in 1526. So she is now second in line to the Spanish throne and the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. No, she's not, because she's actually not. In the Holy Roman Empire, females were not allowed to inherit the throne. It had to be a male, although they were mainly elected. So the Holy Roman Empire succession was a little bit murky. However, it was pretty much hereditary, although it didn't necessarily have to be that way. But in Spain, it was hereditary. So, in theory, his brother was the heir apparent, not the heir presumptive, and then his niece was second in line in 1526. Now, in 1527, those things changed because Carlos I has a son named Felipe in 1527. Now, this guy will eventually become king of Spain upon the death of his father, and you'll see what happens here, which bumps Ferdinand, his brother, down to second in line to the throne. So Felipe is now, or Philip, he's known as Philip II, but Felipe is now the heir apparent to Carlos I. Now, in 1528, Carlos I has a daughter by the name of Maria of Spain. Now, these weren't his first kids. However, Carlos I had previously had a daughter in 1522, but she was illegitimate, so she's obviously not allowed to inherit the throne. So his second child was a daughter named Maria of Spain. So Maria over here is now, Maria of Spain is now second in line to the throne behind her brother Felipe, after Carlos is king. So this is all going to hold true for the rest of this time until we get to 1545, because he's going to keep ruling until 1545. Again, these are all Habsburg monarchs. So 1545, Carlos I has a second son. Now, this is a very prestigious position because of how much land this guy is ruling over. Don Juan de Austria. So he names him, gives him the title of Austria because, again, he's Holy Roman Emperor, which is Austria. So Don Juan was born in 1545 as the second son of Carlos I. Now, Felipe is still the heir, so he's not really worried about that. So this is all good stuff here. So in 1558, things change because Carlos I dies in 1558 after being on the throne for 42 years, which is a very long reign. He took the throne back in 1516. First king of the United Kingdom of Spain. Now he decides, you know what, he's actually a smart guy, and he wants to hold on to power. He wants his family to hold on to power. So what he does is, he's like, man, I am ruling over a lot of territory. I'm the Holy Roman Emperor, and I'm the King of Spain. I hold two very prestigious titles. What do I want to do with this? He decides that he wants to split his kingdom up into two parts, go back to Spain and Holy Roman Empire being separate, although they will be allied with each other. So if you remember, he decides to give the title in the senior branch of the Habsburg line to his eldest son, Felipe. So Felipe ends up becoming, he says, okay, upon my death, Felipe, my eldest son, will become king of Spain. In return, I will give the title Holy Roman Emperor to my brother, Ferdinand, if you guys remember him. So this guy becomes Holy Roman Emperor upon the death of Carlos I. And his son becomes King of Spain. So they're both part of the House of Habsburg, but keep in mind that the Spanish, this is where the Habsburgs switch, because it's originally, you'll hear about two branches of the Habsburg family. So there's the Spanish branch and the Austrian branch. The Spanish branch is more senior, but the Spanish branch ends up dying off. And you'll see why that happens, because there's very, very crooked stuff that goes on between the descendants of Felipe here. So he gives the title King of Spain to Felipe II. Now, keep in mind that Felipe II is not Holy Roman Emperor, like I said. His father was, but his uncle is Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand I of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, he rules until 1564 anyway. But Felipe II's got no kids at this point. Now, let's please acknowledge here that Felipe II is, again, also a Habsburg monarch, but he doesn't have any kids by this point. His heir right now is his younger brother, Don Juan. And Don Juan is about 14 years old, 1559. And then his sister, Maria, is now second in line to the throne. Now, this is all going to hold true until we get to 1566. Because in 1566, his brother Don Juan has a daughter himself. Her name is... No, that's not her. No, Maria dies. No, she doesn't. Hold on. Who's this person? Oh! What? Hold up. Hold up, guys. False alarm. Oh, I had it all wrong. Okay. This guy is actually this is Carlos of Spain. Carlos is the son of Felipe II. So Felipe actually is the son. This is Carlos the first grandson. Sorry about that. I thought that was the same person. They had the same portrait. I got confused there. So this is his son, Carlos. Now his heir is his sister Maria in 1561. 1566, Felipe II, King of Spain, has a daughter named Isabella. Now, Felipe II ends up marrying 4 times, okay? And now, it's kind of complicated because his first wife was Maria Manuela, who was a Portuguese princess. The first cousin once removed of King Sebastian of Portugal. Now, Portugal goes through kind of a succession crisis because Carlos I's wife, who was the mother of Felipe, was also Portuguese. And the Portuguese succession goes through the Habsburgs. So, Felipe II ends up becoming king of Portugal as well. And every single monarch until the year 1640, where the House of Braganza is going to be, of the House of Braganza, they're all going to be Portuguese monarchs as well. So this guy, Felipe II, is ruling over the entire Iberian Peninsula at this time. He's ruling over Spain and Portugal. So he's also the king of Portugal. So know that. And that happens because his mother was Portuguese. And he marries a Portuguese princess as well, his first wife is. And that's who he has, I believe, his first 2 kids with. He has his son, Carlos, was with that Portuguese woman. He married a second time to Queen Mary I of England, who's known as Bloody Mary. And Felipe II was kind of ruling a little bit over there in England for a little bit, because they didn't really want queens to really have power in England, because this is like the 1500s. Queens weren't really that much of a big deal, and they didn't really exist. So Felipe kind of had his own role as Philip of England, although his wife was the Queen Regnant. They never had any kids together, and then Mary died in 1558, so Felipe remarried a third time. This third wife he had was Elizabeth of France, who was the daughter of Henri II of France. And that is who he has this daughter here with, Elizabeth of France. Now, she's her mother was the daughter of Henri II, so therefore she was also the sister of Charles IX, Francois II, and Henri III. All from the House of Valois, the last 3 Valois kings of France. So she was part of the House of Valois. So very interesting there. Elizabeth de Valois. And he has 2 daughters with her. So, in 1568, his son, Carlos, dies. In 1568. He's still married to Elizabeth de Valois at this point. But his wife, Elizabeth, dies, and so does his son, Carlos. So this issue is kind of a problem. This is the second daughter that he had with the French woman, the French princess, and her name was Caterina. So we have Isabella and Caterina. These are the 2 wives. Now these, obviously, they were kind of his 2 daughters. Now, Felipe II was fine, but in 1568, with the death of his son, he decides to get remarried a fourth time, okay? This is where the famous Habsburg inbreeding starts. Because, guess who Felipe II decides to marry? He marries his niece, Maria of Austria. Felipe II's sister's daughter. Felipe II ends up marrying his niece. Now, I know a bunch in monarchies, there's a lot of first cousin marriages, which is unhealthy and disgusting, but an uncle-niece marriage? Ugh, it's kind of gross, Felipe. Luckily, though, maybe it's just for fun. Maybe he's not going to actually have children. Now, if he has a child, that's going to be bad. But Felipe needs a son because his previous heir had died, and he needs a son to take after him. So, in 1571, his wife, his niece, who's also like 20 or 30 years younger than him, gives birth. Okay, this guy's in his 60s. He's like in his 40s or 50s. He's in his 40s or 50s at this point. Felipe II's wife, who is also his niece. So imagine that for a second. That's so weird. So basically, if your mom and dad were uncle and niece, your mom is your first cousin, technically. Your mom is also your first cousin, and your father is also your father is your great uncle as well, and also your mother's your first cousin, and then you have great grandparents that are also great grandparents. Well, that's just weird. I never really thought about that till now. Anyway, so they have a son in 1571. However, because of the inbreeding that this posed, I'm just saying, guys, I'm not saying who you should marry and who you shouldn't, but just think about it. Maybe, and not do what the Habsburgs did, guys. But trust me, it's going to get way worse. So, anyhow, this guy's name is Ferdinand. Now, Ferdinand only lives to be about 6 years old. Now, I don't know if that's because of what, but there's a good chance we know why. So, he lives only to be 6. However, though, 1573, he has another son. Felipe has another son. And his name is Karl Lorenz of Austria. He dies at the age of 2. He dies in 1575. He's already dead. However, in 1575, the year that this son died, he has a third son with his niece named Diego. Diego lives to be 7. 1578, his eldest son dies at the age of 8. Although, luckily, in 1578, he has a fourth son. Felipe II has a fourth son named Felipe. Now, this guy got lucky. That's all I'm going to say. He got lucky. Now, this guy is still the heir. Diego's still the heir. However, he dies in 1582, so goodbye. That's 3 sons that died before the age of 10. One of them was 2. One was 7. One was 8. Or one was 6. No. 2 years old, 6 years old, and 8 years old. So at the end of the day, his daughter comes back as second in line to the Spanish throne, and they're all Habsburgs. So Felipe, his fifth son, because 4 of his sons had died, so his fourth son with his niece, his very last wife, Felipe, is born. Now, luckily, this guy ends up outliving his father, so he does end up becoming king, luckily. Not to mention that also in 1580, I didn't put her on the list just because she wasn't in because the male preference rules. He actually also had a daughter with his niece as well, that wife, named Maria, who lived to be 3 years old, lived from 1580 to 1583, so that's kind of unfortunate that those children had to go through that, but that's how it is. So this is all going to hold true for the rest of the 1580s until we get to 1598, because in 1598, Felipe II dies after a very long reign of like 42 or 40 years. I think it was 40 years. Felipe II was also king during when Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire, and also during the Spanish Armada in 1588, which was a great defeat. But Felipe II was an amazing monarch. He just didn't make. He just kind of had some weird situations there with his heirs. But nonetheless, he does die in 1598. So the throne now passes to his son, Felipe III. So Felipe III is now king. He's also, again, part of the House of Habsburg. So that's kind of interesting. Now, Felipe III ends up... Trying to think here. Yeah, so... Okay. Felipe III ends up... The Habsburg inbreeding is not done. Because he ends up marrying his cousin. His first or second cousin. I think it's his first cousin. Felipe III ends up marrying his first cousin. And now his parents were uncle and niece, of course. But his wife was his first cousin, so ends up marrying her as well. Don't have any kids just yet, though. They will, though. Because the Habsburg dynasty is going to continue to rule in Spain. And they're going to run out of heirs pretty soon as well. And you'll see why that happens. So, 1601 is when they have their first child. Now, since it was a second cousin marriage or first cousin marriage, it's going to be a little bit more healthy for them. Now, I feel like I'm just talking about like incest now, which is pretty much what I'm talking about. But that's what the Habsburgs are. They're incest. The funds, not okay. This is Anne of Austria, who is his daughter. His eldest daughter was born in 1601, which bumps his half-sister down to second one. Now, this is all going to hold true. He has a stillborn child, 1603, who dies very young, lives to be less than an 8-year-old. And then 1605, Felipe III has another son, or has his first son named Felipe as well. So he is pretty sick looking, if I have to say so myself. So he's also Habsburg. So Felipe III is still king, and that's just how that is. So his daughter there and stuff like that. In 1609 or 1607, he has Felipe III has a second son named Carlos. So Carlos is now the heir. In 1607, second heir behind his eldest son, Felipe. So Felipe III ends up continuing to rule here until we get to 1621. He dies in 1621, and not as bad as you think, like his siblings. He actually lives to be 42, which 42 by no means is old to die at, but back in the 1620s, that's pretty, 42 is what it is. So he dies on March 31st, 31st of March, 1621. March 31st, 1621. And then the throne passes to his eldest son, Felipe. So Felipe the Fourth is now on the throne. So he becomes Felipe the Fourth. He's got two brothers, both Carlos, and then his other brother is a cardinal by the name of Ferdinand or Fernando. Now, since he's a Catholic cardinal, he's legally not allowed to have kids, so he doesn't have any kids. Carlos never ends up having any kids either. So you'll see what happens with that. But Felipe the Fourth, man, made the same mistake that his grandfather made. He marries his niece, as if the Habsburgs didn't already learn. Now, think about what this means for a second. So he marries his cousin. His parents are cousins. His grandparents are uncle and niece. And then his great-grandparents are also first cousins, because Carlos the First's wife was also his second cousin, so they were also related. Basically, this is about 4 generations of inbreeding. And it's going to start to take its toll here, ladies and gentlemen. So, Felipe IV is going to struggle to have an heir, essentially. He has a stillborn child in 1621 named Maria Margaretha of Austria. I can't talk. 1629, Felipe IV has a son named Balthazar of Spain. He ends up living to be 17, though, so that's not too bad. Balthazar. And then another illegitimate child. So his brother here, Carlos, is still second in line. Carlos dies in 1632, so the cardinal, by the name of Fernando, is next in line. So in 1638, Felipe IV has a daughter named Maria Teresa of Spain. Now, please note that Maria Teresa of Spain ends up marrying Louis XIV of France. So, very, very cool. She was actually 5 days younger than Louis XIV. So she ends up marrying Louis XIV of France. Now, keep that in mind because that is going to be very revolutionary. Because Louis XIV is part of the House of Bourbon in France. And you'll see what happens with that as moving forward here. So Felipe IV keeps doing that. His stuff. 1646, his son dies at the age of 17. So he does not have a male heir anymore. So now his wife is, or not his wife, his daughter is now first in line to the Spanish throne. And yes, for those of you guys that didn't know, this guy over here is King Louis XIV of France. Louis XIV is now second in line to the Spanish throne. Yeah, he's the king of France this time. Now, very interesting because you're probably asking yourself, how do we get Louis XIV of France? Well, the reason we get him is because in 1647, Felipe III's sister, Anne of Austria, I don't know if you remember her, but she was back here. This woman here ends up marrying Louis XIII of France and has a son named Louis XIV, who ends up marrying Felipe IV's daughter. So they're related, but genealogically, Louis XIV is second in line to the throne, not because he's the husband of her, but just because he's actually legitimately, genealogically speaking, next in line to the throne, Louis XIV of France. So, if Felipe IV were to die and his daughter were to die, Louis XIV would become King of Spain as well. So, very interesting there. But Felipe IV decides, he's like, I need to have a son. So, he pretty much, he does. In 1651, he has another daughter here. So she's kind of going to take precedence over Louis XIV now. So that kind of gets the Bourbons out of there because he doesn't really want France and Spain uniting, I don't think. And no one wants a union between Spain and France. Come on. Now, especially this time period because they're constantly just hating each other. However, Felipe IV's second daughter here, Marguerite Teresa, was born in 1651. Now, in 1657, Felipe IV has a son named Felipe Prosper of Spain. Now, he ends up dying in 1661, but in 1661, Felipe, because he doesn't live long because of the inbreeding, he lives to be 4 years old. But Felipe IV luckily has another son in 1661 named Carlos. So Carlos will be completely fine. And yeah, that's a man. Okay, I know that is a very frightening. Look at that guy's chin. This guy, Habsburgs at their finest. But yeah, that's just insane. So 1661 his son is, which means she's back in 1662. Felipe IV ends up dying in 1665, leaving his 4-year-old son Carlos as king. Now, Carlos is he becomes King Carlos II of Spain. Now, holy crap. This guy is literally one of the most inbred, probably the most inbred monarch that you ever get. He is the last Spanish king from the House of Habsburg because he is so inbred that he only lives to be 38 years old and he is not able to have kids. And also, he married his cousin. So, if he did. Essentially, this guy, think about generations. Uncle-niece marriages and cousin marriages just are starting to take their toll. I feel so bad for this guy. Essentially, he should have never... Charles II of Spain should have just never been born. Like, I'm going to be honest, he should have never been born. I feel so bad for this guy. He suffered from a lot of mental and physical disorders throughout his life. I'm so sorry for him. I know he was, just trying to do his best as king. I know he was king, but man, I feel sorry for him. He just should never have been born. And he wasn't able to produce any kids. And thank goodness he wasn't, because imagine if he was able to produce a child, what that would look like. This looks like a literal... That doesn't even look like a human being. And think about it. These portraits were designed to make people look good. So chances are he probably looked worse than that in real life. But yeah, I'm so sorry, Carlos II. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Anyhow, let's stick to the facts here, folks. He was born, 1661. He rules as King of Spain. He's the last king from the House of Habsburg. Now, she over here, his sister, or his I think it's his sister. Yeah, is the mother, or the wife of Louis XIV, of course. But she has a son named Louis le Grand Dauphin. Now, Louis le Grand Dauphin is the son of Louis XIV, so he's also the heir to the French throne as well as the Spanish throne. So the Spanish nobles were really trying hard to get Carlos II to have kids. They just couldn't do it. And it got to the point where it was just inevitable that he was going to die. And people were just waiting for him to die. But there was a problem because when he dies, we're going to get French. The Bourbons are going to take over in Spain. And they did. But it didn't go down well for him. But anyway, Carlos II, he actually lived surprisingly long time, though. But in 1683, his sister dies, leaving... So now his heir, Le Grand Dauphin, is now the heir to the throne. With his son, Le Petit Dauphin, being the second heir to the Spanish throne. So Le Grand Dauphin is in a great spot here. He's going to get some power because he is now the heir to not only the Spanish throne but also the French throne as well, being from the House of Bourbon. He just has to wait till Carlos II dies or Louis XIV to die. But if you know anything about Louis XIV, he ain't dying anytime soon. He's still got 30 plus years left in him. Louis XIV is the longest reigning monarch in European history. 72 years on the throne. But Carlos II ends up living for another 16 years after this point. So Le Petit Dauphin and Le Grand Dauphin. So obviously, like I said, the Spanish nobles and the people of Spain are just pretty much at this point just accepting that Carlos II is not going to have any kids and the Habsburg dynasty is going to die with him. They're just waiting for him to die at this point. And it's only a matter of time before he does. He manages to make it all the way until 38 years old somehow. In 1700 is when Carlos II, the poor guy, dies. In 1700. At the age of 38. Now, honestly, remarkable how he made it that long. I guess they just really, really try to keep him alive. And most people, even France, can say they don't want a union with Spain. So what happens is, in 1700, upon the death of Carlos II, they come up with a deal. They don't want France and Spain uniting. But the House of Bourbon has to take over in Spain because it's the senior line succession. So if nothing were to have taken place, Louis Le Grand Dauphin would have become King of Spain upon the death of Carlos II, of Charles II, with Le Petit Dauphin being his heir. But Le Grand Dauphin, they know that he will one day, become King of France. And so then they know when Louis XIV dies, Le Grand Dauphin is going to become King of France anyway. Although he doesn't because he gets outlived, but that's just besides the point. This is, put your minds in 1700. This is when we think Louis XIV, he's going to die sometime soon. We know that Le Grand Dauphin is going to become King of France. Now, if he's already King of Spain, that's going to cause France and Spain to unite, which we don't want. So, they invite the second son of Le Grand Dauphin to bypass the eldest son, Le Petit Dauphin. Le Petit Dauphin, they also know, he's in the senior line of the Bourbons, and he's going to become King of France one day too. However, both Le Grand Dauphin and Le Petit Dauphin get outlived by Louis XIV. It's not until Le Petit Dauphin's son who becomes Louis XV in 1715. But that's just how that goes. They know that Le Grand Dauphin and Le Petit Dauphin, whether they live or not, the throne of France, the French throne, is going to pass through them. And if they inherit the Spanish throne, it's going to cause a union, and they don't want that. So, they invite the second son of Le Grand Dauphin to come in and take the throne after Carlos II dies. So that puts an end, after the death of Carlos I, puts an end to the House of Habsburg. And in comes the House of Bourbon from France. House of Bourbon actually still rules today in Spain. However, this shift was not so subtle. This, with the death of Carlos I and the end of the Habsburgs and the entrance of the French Bourbon dynasty, causes the War of the Spanish Succession, which starts in 1701 and goes until 1718. What's the war? Basically, there were two options that had to happen when Carlos II died. This guy, Philippe, he's known in French, comes in and becomes King Felipe V. Felipe el Cinco de España, or Philip V of Spain. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, you're probably wondering what happened there. Well, I filmed this whole video and then I realized that I went through the 1700s without putting on my wig. So that was kind of, I'm sorry, I have my powdered wig on now that we're talking about. We're entering the age of the powdered wigs, folks. Now, it actually previously started earlier on, but Spain didn't get the kick until the Bourbons took over. So, I gotta redo this whole thing, and then once I'm done with the age of the wigs, I'll go back to the original recording. But anyway, so I just cut it off there. So, let's talk about the War of the Spanish Succession here, ladies and gentlemen, for a moment. So, as you know, as previously talked about, Carlos II from the House of Habsburg was the very last Habsburg king, and he died in 1700. So the throne had to pass to the Bourbons in Spain, or France. The Bourbons in France. So Felipe el Cinco de España, or Felipe V of Spain, is now king. Now, he was obviously the most senior member to take over the Spanish throne because of his, genealogically speaking, he is the next in line to the throne. But there was a dispute within the Habsburg family to try to keep the Habsburgs on the throne because they did not want the throne passing to the Bourbons because of they didn't want France and Spain uniting. And they didn't, even though they knew it wasn't going to unite the thrones, they didn't want the House of Bourbon ruling in both France and Spain. So the Habsburgs tried to stay on the throne. This angered Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, who was Holy Roman Emperor at the time over in Austria. And he wanted his son Archduke Carl VI to become King of Spain. So basically Austria and France go to war for the Spanish throne. So basically the Holy Roman Empire, or Austria, and France are at war with each other over who gets to become King of Spain. And it was a huge, huge war. I mean, even Britain was involved. Hungary was involved. Prussia. So many different kingdoms were involved in this conflict. And it really didn't go anywhere. And it lasted for 17 years. Basically, Felipe V gets to stay on the throne throughout the entirety. And, The Bourbons have all the power. He never gets dethroned or anything like that during the war. The war really never goes anywhere until they eventually get sick of fighting. That's just kind of how it ends. But in 1707, Le Grand Dauphin is now kicked back to the next in line. But here's what I'm saying. So we got to do for the heirs of Felipe V. I had to kind of speculate myself on not really the facts, but what I think would have happened had Felipe V died in 1701. Now, obviously, the most likely thing that would have happened was the Habsburgs probably would have taken power. But, succession-wise, this is what I think would have happened. I think the first in line to the throne, Louis Le Grand Dauphin had 3 sons in total. The eldest was Louis Le Petit Dauphin, who was obviously set to become King of France and was in the most senior branch of the Bourbons. So he was bypassed by the second son, Felipe, who is here. But Le Grand Dauphin had a third son named Charles, the Duke of Berry, who is this guy here. And now I'm pretty sure if Felipe V would have died in 1701, the throne would have passed to Charles, the Duke of Berry. Although, in reality, it probably would have just went back to the Habsburgs, just because they're already at war for it. But, excluding the rules of war, of how war works, because, you know, it's messy. War's messy. But, if they weren't at war with Austria, I think he would have become king. Now, after Charles in the line of succession, because Felipe and Charles don't have any kids themselves, I think the throne would have had to have gone to Le Grand Dauphin. Now, you're probably wondering, why not Le Petit Dauphin? Well, Le Petit Dauphin was bypassed in the same fashion that Le Grand Dauphin was bypassed. And Le Grand Dauphin was already more senior anyway. So if it would have passed to Le Petit Dauphin, it still wouldn't have made any sense. Because at this point, had these 2 individuals died without kids, it's pretty inevitable that the throne of Spain and France would have united, and the Bourbons would have ended up ruling both territories. So that would have been bad, because France didn't even want a union. That's just kind of how it was. But I'm pretty confident that third in line of the throne would have been Le Petit Dauphin. Luckily, though, in 1707, Felipe El Cinco has a son named Luis, or Louis. They're all French still, pretty much. So he's got a French name, Louis, although in Spanish it's Luis, and then Carlos over here, and Luis. So he's the eldest son of Felipe V. I know how to pronounce these names, like Spanish names, pretty well because I've taken 2 years of Spanish class at my school, at my high school. So I have kind of experience. I can kind of speak Spanish. Probably speak Spanish this whole video. You guys wouldn't know what I'm saying, but I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm just gonna do this for now. But Luis is now first in line of the throne, being the eldest son of Felipe V, and then the Duke of Berry bumped down to second in line. In 1712, by the way, Le Grand Dauphin dies in 1711, and Le Petit Dauphin dies in 1712. So Louis XIV was still alive. So he outlives both of them. Although Le Petit Dauphin had a son in 1710 who was able to become king, Louis XV, in 1715 when Louis XIV actually died. But that's France. We're talking about Spain here, guys. So this is the second son of Felipe V. A little boy who didn't live very long. He died in 1719, and I think his name was, I think it was Carlos, but I could be wrong, which is why I'm fact-checking here. Okay, his name was Carlos. Oh, it's Felipe. Oh, Felipe de Bourbon. So he lives until 1719, and then he dies at the age of 7. Luckily, though, Felipe V has another son named Fernando, who is now second in line of the throne. He will later become Fernando VI. Very cool with him. He was born in 1713. So that's kind of how that goes. There we go. So, we're moving on through here. So, stuff goes down in 1723. Well, the War of the Spanish Succession comes to an end in 1718 while this guy's still alive because Leopold I of the Holy Roman Empire dies in 1711, and then his son ends up dying in 1718. So then Archduke Karl, who they're fighting to get on the throne of Spain, becomes Holy Roman Emperor. And no one really wants the Holy Roman Empire and Spain uniting. So, basically, they don't want it to be like how it was in the 1500s with Carlos I again. So the war just kind of fizzles out there. And they're like, we're just fighting for no reason. It never really went anywhere. Although, a lot of people did die from it. But that's just kind of how it is. So in 1719, Felipe dies. So then we get to the 1720s. In 1724, in January of 1724, the eldest son of Felipe V is Luis, and Luis is about 17 years old, 16 or 17, and Felipe V decides, you know what, I'm kind of done being king. He never really expected to be king anyway. Didn't really want the job too much, but he had to do it. Although he enjoyed ruling for the most part, I think. He was just kind of like, I'm going to give my son a chance. So he decides to abdicate in 1724, January 1724, in favor of Luis I. Now, Felipe V was still alive during the reign of Luis I. He was just kind of sitting there. Although Luis I becomes king in January of 1724, he dies in August of 1724. So he only rules for like 7 months. So then, his heirs are his two brothers. He's got another brother named Carlos over here. This is Fernando. So in August of 1724, Felipe V decides to come back to the throne and rule until his death. He wanted to give Luis probably. He only ruled 7 months, so Felipe wasn't going to let his 11-year-old son become king while he's still alive. It doesn't really make any sense, so Felipe V comes back. He ends up ruling until 1746, which is when he dies. So he ends up ruling for the next 22 years after that. First monarch from the House of Bourbon, and also the third monarch from the House of Bourbon. So he ends up dying in 1746, leaving the throne to his eldest surviving son, Fernando VI. Fernando VI. Now, he was from the House of Bourbon as well. They all are. All the rest of the monarchs are from the House of Bourbon, except for with the ones during the civil wars and stuff like that. Now, he is Fernando VI. Now, it was kind of complicated on how he's the sixth Fernando, because previously in the Kingdom of Castile, there had been 4 Fernandos, and in Aragon, there had been 2 Fernandos. So it's kind of weird how he's the 6th, because if you add all those up, wouldn't he be Fernando the 7th? But if we're just taking Castile, he'd be Fernando the 6th, and if we're just taking Aragon, he'd be Fernando the 3rd. So where are you getting Fernando the 6th from? Well, here's how it is. The main kingdom of Spain pretty much follows the succession rules of Castile, and there were 4 Felipes in Castile. Now, if you remember Ferdinand and Isabella, Fernando II of Aragon, they both unitedly, although it was not official, because they ruled over Aragon and Castile separately, it was still the main picture of Spain. So I think they're counting Fernando II of Aragon to be Fernando V of Castile. Therefore, the King of Spain is Fernando VI. That's where I think they're getting that from. But again, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's where you get the numeration 6th for Fernando. Fernando VI sadly never ends up having any children, so the throne, his line pretty much dies with him, although he does have a brother named Carlos, and Carlos has a daughter over here. And his daughter's name is Maria, I believe. Mariana. It's Mariana Victor. Oh, that's not her. Maria Josefa de Bourbon. Maria Josefa. So she is second in line to the throne after his younger brother Carlos. So Fernando VI, he's just going to have rolling until he dies. Although in 1748, Carlos, who will soon become Carlos III, has another son named Carlos. And this guy will become Carlos IV. All these 3 individuals will become king one day. They're just waiting for Fernando VI to die at this point. So, Fernando VI ends up ruling until 1759 when he dies at the age of about, I think he was born in 1713, so he was 46 years old when he died in 1759. Leaving the throne to the 1760s, passing to Carlos, his younger brother, Carlos III. Carlos III is now King of Spain from the House of Bourbon. And his heir is his eldest son, Carlos, who eventually became Carlos IV. And then his second son over here. His second son is very interesting because he actually becomes the monarch of Italy later down the line. Never inherits the Spanish throne, but he does inherit the Italian throne. And his name is Ferdinand. And he becomes King Ferdinand I of Italy. So very interesting there. So the House of Bourbon ends up ruling in Italy. I believe just for one monarch, though. Because the Italian monarchy was a little bit different in the hereditary. It wasn't completely hereditary. It was more like the Holy Roman Empire was. Although Spain is completely hereditary, with male preference primogeniture being pretty strict, which is very nice. And that's kind of how the Bourbons were able to hold all their power that they did. So very cool. Very, very cool there. So, this all holds true for the rest of this time period. Until we get to 1771, because in 1771, Carlos III has a grandson, Carlos IV, who will soon become Carlos IV. He's still prince at this point, first line of throne. He has a son named, this is Carlos Clemente de Bourbon. Now, he ends up dying in 1774, so he only lives for like 3 years. So kind of sad with him. But luckily in 1775, Carlos has another daughter named Carlota Joaquina de Bourbon. En 1775 at that time. So that's kind of her. Anyway, so she lives for a while until 1780. Well, she's still alive, but 1780, Carlos has a son named Carlos Domingo Eusebio de Bourbon. Carlos Domingo Eusebio de Bourbon. Long names. These guys have long names, but that was 1780, which is the year 1780 in Spanish. You guys, I know a good amount of Spanish, so I know how to say the years and stuff like that. I can say like basic sentences in Spanish. I mean, I'm not saying I can have a whole full conversation with somebody yet. I will be able to one day. Just I can speak Spanish way better than the average person can. Is what I'm saying. So that is him. He ends up dying in 1783 though, so kind of sad there for him. 1783 though, Carlos has twins, Felipe Francisco de Paula de Bourbon and Carlos Francisco de Paula de Bourbon. So this guy was older allegedly, but he ends up dying in 1784 at the age of he's like 1 year old, 13 months old, and then his brother was like 14 months old. So he was born in September. They were both born in September of 1783, and then he dies in October 1784, and then his brother dies in November of 1784. Or noviembre. So now, luckily though, in 1784, Carlos was able to have another son named Fernando. So Fernando is now next in line after Carlos III. Now Carlos III dies in 1788. So, leaving the throne to his son Carlos, who now becomes Carlos IV. So, Carlos III was actually a pretty good monarch, but he ends up dying in 1788 after being on the throne for 29 years. Not too bad. So, then we get Carlos IV. Now, Carlos IV was pretty much the last, really good monarch of Spain that we had for a while. So, now we're up to 1789 with Carlos el Cuatro. King. So Fernando, his eldest surviving son, is now heir to the throne. And then his second son here, Carlos Maria Isidro Benito de Bourbon, is now his second surviving son, although it's like his fifth or sixth son at this point. is now second in line to the throne. So now we're entering the 1790s. Not much goes on in the rest of the 1700s. And then eventually in 1808, stuff goes down. And I'm going to get to, we're kind of now past the age of the powdered wigs, so I'm going to go back to the original recording. So that's the 1700s of the Bourbons. So I'm going to go back to the original recordings, and I'll see you guys there. Things kind of come to a shift because the Napoleonic Wars are going on at this time. Napoleon takes his conquest into Spain. But at this time, and this is the big trend to happen with modern Spanish monarchs, before Napoleon was actually able to conquer Spain, early on in 1808, now Napoleon had led his first conquest in 1799, so throughout the early years in the 1800s, first couple of years of the 1800s, Napoleon was doing conquest. He didn't conquer Spain until 1808, but Carlos IV ended up abdicating the throne, just like his grandfather, or his great-grandfather Felipe V did. But Carlos IV ended up abdicating. So then his son becomes Fernando VII for a couple of months until Napoleon takes over. But Napoleon Bonaparte takes over with the French Empire. But Napoleon doesn't rule Spain himself. He lets his brother Joseph Bonaparte, who was actually older. He was born in 1768. I think Napoleon was born in 1769. So his older brother Joseph ends up ruling the Spanish portion of Napoleon's French Empire. Although Napoleon's emperor, he's just kind of emperor of the Spanish part. So as you can see, we've got kind of a flag change up here. We go from the Spanish royal family to the French Empire. That is the short-lived empire of the Bonapartes. So allegedly, the Spanish royal family of the Bourbons are in exile, and Napoleon obviously came into power in France after the Revolution because the French Bourbons have all died off by this point. So Carlos IV was the most senior Bourbon anyway at this point. And then I guess Fernando VII, but he was at this point anyway. So by the time we get to 1809, Joseph's heir is his brother Napoleon Bonaparte. Probably would have taken the throne after Joseph if he would have died during this short period. But he wanted Joseph to rule over Spain just because Emperor was off fighting and stuff. He couldn't really handle it all on his own, so he wanted to kind of split up his realms. And it's also a smart move to do as a leader, to split up your realms to make sure that you're not having to control everything, because it's tough to hold that position. You have to have multiple people, although he was superior in power. He just had that other one. So this is Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who is the third brother. So he's got some sideburns just like these right here. So very cool. 1811, though, Napoleon has a son who eventually becomes Napoleon II. He actually rules France for like 2 weeks or something like that after Napoleon gets put in exile in 1814. But it doesn't last long because Spain and the Bourbons end up retaking Spain in 1813. So Joseph and the Bonapartes are taken out in Napoleon's empire. This is when Napoleon's empire kind of starts to fizzle out. And by the time we get to 1814, Fernando VII is now on the throne of Spain with the Bourbons. Now keep in mind, Carlos IV is still alive. He doesn't die until 1819. He's just kind of chilling in the back while this is all happening. I think he moves to Rome, actually. And that's where he lives the rest of his life in exile. That's where most of the Spanish royals went during the Napoleonic Wars, was in Rome, Italy. But Fernando VII comes in as King of Spain. He's not known as a very good king anyway. But Carlos Maria, his brother, is now first in the line. So very cool there. He was born in 1784. Fernando VII. Here's the man. So yeah, famous graves. Okay, so very cool. So this is his other. This might be Carlos's son here. This guy. Let me check to make sure. He ends up living until 1855, so that's kind of interesting. This is the other brother, I guess. Francisco de Paula de Bourbon. Now this all goes true until 1819, 1818. Not these. This is his Carlos' son here, named Francisco de Paula de Bourbon. So now we're getting kind of the era of photographs now. So he's black and white photograph. So he was born in 1818, although he's the nephew of Fernando VII. In 1820, no, it's 1830. This all is the same through there. Until we get 1819 is when Carlos IV actually dies. So he's just kind of chilling in Rome until all this stuff goes down. So pretty cool with him there. So very cool. Yeah, he does 1819. What I'm trying to do here, guys. Give me just a sec. Okay, he dies in 1819. Alright, 1830. Let's get back on track here, guys. Fernando VII has a daughter named Isabella. Alright, now he doesn't know if he's going to have any sons or not, so for now, she's the heir to the Spanish throne. Very crazy what happens there. So Carlos is second in line now after Fernando VII's daughter is now queen. Or not queen, she's princess. Princesa, the heir. Presumptive. So, where's he at here? Where's the legend? Where's the legend? King Fernando VII, 1784 to 1833. So I had to do exactly like that. Anyway, so Isabella, 1830. 1832, he has a second daughter named Maria Luisa Fernanda de Bourbon. So she's now second in line. In 1833, Fernando VII dies, leaving the throne to his daughter, Isabella. So we actually get a queen regnant. The only queen regnant in Spanish history since Isabella I. So, post the Union, she's the only queen regnant that we've had on the throne. But that might change here in a couple decades, who knows? But you'll see what. So, Carlos is now second in line after her sister Maria here. So this is Isabella II, because obviously the one of Castile was Isabella I. She ends up ruling for a while, but in 1848, her sister has a daughter. Maria Luisa Fernanda de Bourbon has a daughter named Marie Isabella de Orléans. So she's actually French, because she ends up marrying Antoine de Orléans, a French noble. She ends up marrying the son of Louis Philippe I. That's kind of cool. The Orleans, King of France. Very, very cool. Yeah, Spain and France are just right next to each other, right over the border of the mountains there. So, yeah, that's her niece, I guess. So her daughter is now right there. Very cool. So, 1851, Isabella II has a daughter of her own named Maria Isabella de Bourbon. So she's now heir to the throne. And that's going to hold true until 1857, because in 1857, Alfonso, Isabella II's son is born. So this is all going to hold true. She doesn't have any more sons, so it just goes until there, or at least any that survive. So 1868, there's a revolution that takes place in Spain, which causes basically Isabella II to be deposed as monarch. So she's no longer queen, basically, at this time. They kick her out and the entire rule. So in 1869, it's still Spain, of course, but there's a revolution that goes on. And this is going to cause kind of some havoc, because the Bourbons are not going to be in power right now. And this doesn't last long, But it's just something to keep in mind, because it's going to take us to the House of Savoy, which is an Italian royal family. In 1869, it's an interregnum, no monarch at all. In 1870, they invite Amadeus from the House of Savoy to come in and become King of Spain. Now, he only ends up ruling for 3 years. So this is the symbol of the House of Savoy when they ruled Spain, because he got the Spanish stuff. And these are his heirs, his 2 sons. I'm not going to say their names because they're not really that important, but they're the 2 heirs for that time period. 1871. He's in there from 1870 to 1873. In 1873, though, the Bourbons end up coming back. Alfonso XII ends up coming back. Now, Isabella II actually lives until 1904, so she lives a long time. But Alfonso becomes King Alfonso XII. Now, Alfonso XI had been King of Castile back in the 1300s. He took the throne in 1313, so going way back there is Alfonso XI. So this is Alfonso XII. Got some epic sideburns. This guy's kind of my idol here. I love Alfonso XII. So he's now King of Spain, and these are his 2 heirs. He ends up having a daughter in 1880, and then, so that's pretty cool. He has a daughter there, and then in 1882 he has a second daughter. So his sister is now getting passed up for his 2 daughters in the line. Now, Alfonso XII, he needs to have a son to, sustain the monarchy, of course, as we get into the 1880s. However, he ends up dying in 1885. But that does not mean that there's not going to be a male heir, because when he dies, Alfonso XII, his wife is pregnant with a son. This is going to be another Jean the First. We get 13, 16 flashbacks, French flashbacks here, guys. Not. I don't really know. Trust me, it's going to go a little bit better than Jean the First. So Alfonso XII, his wife is pregnant with a son. However, Alfonso XII ends up dying in 1885. The only monarch in the 1880s, well, one of 2, Fernando VII, I guess, that actually dies while king, because Isabella and Amadeus, Napoleon, and Carlos IV did not, but he does. So in 1886, his eldest son becomes king before he's even born in 1885. So Alfonso XII dies in November of 1885, and Alfonso XIII is now king, and he was born in May of 1886. So he actually became king 6 months before he was even born. So pretty crazy. So he was king for about 6 months before he was even born. So he became king 1885, but he still got 6 months till he's born. So he becomes Alfonso XIII. Alfonso XIII is epic. So these are his 2 sisters, who were alive but didn't become queen. So this is all going to hold true for the rest of the 1800s. Alfonso XIII is going to keep ruling. Alfonso XIII is pretty epic in that sense. So he pulls us in 1900. In 1901, his eldest sister has a son. Her name was obviously Maria de las Mercedes de Bourbon, and her son was Alfonso de Bourbon dos Sicilicas. So that's him. 1904, Maria dies. So Sicilicas, Maria de Alfonso is the heir, and then his sister Isabel Alfonso de Bourbon dos Sicilicas is now second in line. Luckily, though, in 1907, Alfonso XIII ends up having a son. This guy's name is Alfonso Pio Cristino Eduardo de Bourbon. So he's now first in line heir apparent to Alfonso XIII. But stuff's going to go down that doesn't allow this guy to inherit the throne. Plus, he's got there's something wrong with him. He dies when he's like 31, and he becomes the Count of Covadonga. So very interesting there. Alfonso XIII. So 1908, Alfonso XIII has his second son, also all Bourbons. His name is Jaime de Bourbon. He was born in 1908. He ends up dying in 1975, and this guy ends up dying in 1938. You'll see why they're not allowed, why they can't inherit the throne. And stuff tragic happens in the 1930s for Spain, and allows Alfonso the 13th to be kind of dethroned. And it seems like it's going to be the end of the Spanish monarchy. So this is all going to hold true for the rest of the 1910s, 1920s. 1931 is where we're getting to here with this. And that is when Alfonso the 13th gets deposed. Now, think about 1930s. There's a revolution that goes on in Spain that decides, we don't want a king anymore. And this already happened before, but this is going to happen again. So we get the República. There's supposed to be an accent mark on it, my mistake. So República happens. They get rid of Alfonso the 13th and then all of his heirs in 1931. And then we get a prime minister serving in Spain. I'm trying to figure this out here. This is Astana, I think was his name. Prime Minister of Spain, 1932. This is, Alfonso Suarez, I think is who this guy is. He ends up ruling as prime minister until 1933. So this is the symbol of the República in España. And this guy here is Domingo something. No, Santiago, Fernando de something. I don't even know. But it doesn't matter. Because in 1936, a guy by the name of Francisco Franco comes in. Now think about it. This is during the fascist period. World War II goes down during this very unstable República, allowing Francisco Franco to take complete power in Spain. And here's the fire. He becomes El Dictador, dictator, basically. And ends up ruling Spain absolutely in power. Now he's on the Axis powers side, along with Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. He is another one of the fascist dictators in Europe during World War II. However, he kind of tries to stay out of it. He doesn't really get Spain involved too much, but he takes power in 1936, and the fascist dictatorship lives on for almost 40 years under Franco's power. He wants to have a lot of power. Now, his heir is his daughter here. His daughter actually died in 2017, so she lived quite a while. And this is his younger brother there, or I think his older brother, or something like that. So that's pretty cool. So he ends up kicking for a while until in 1951, when he has a granddaughter who would now be next in line to the throne. So it's not really a throne because it's the dictador, but had Francisco Franco died, and we're following the rules of the Spanish succession here. That's how it is. So very interesting. 1949, 1950. So World War II ends, and most of the fascist dictators get taken out, but Francisco Franco, because he stayed out of World War II, he actually gets to rule until he dies. He ends up controlling as a fascist dictator until he ends up dying, which is all the way in 1975. So little do people know, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, there was still a fascist dictatorship in Europe. Pretty crazy. 1954, this guy named Francisco Franco, he's still alive actually. This guy's still alive. He was born in 1954, so that would make him about 69. Hey! Let's go, boys! Years old. So, this time, if you're watching this when it comes out, which is his grandson, Francisco Franco's grandson. So, very cool. Now, Francisco Franco decides, you know what, he doesn't really want the dictatorship to stay within him. He wants to kind of go down in history as like the legendary guy who was able to conquer the Bourbons and the República and stuff like that. So he decides that on his death, he signs a thing in 1969 changing the succession rules. So Francisco Franco changes succession rules in 1969 and names this guy here, Juan Carlos, as his heir once he dies. Now Francisco Franco is like, all right, I'm going to keep rolling till I die. That's set in stone, but what happens when I die? So Juan Carlos I is actually the grandson of Alfonso the 13th from the House of Bourbon. They're all Bourbons. So if you go back here to Alfonso the 13th. This guy died. These two both died during the reign of Francisco Franco. They were both died during that time. I think Jaime died the same year as Francisco Franco. But there was a third son named, I think, Don Juan, something like that. He was Juan Bourbon. He was born in 1913, but he was still alive during that time, but he just wasn't named heir. He ended up dying in 1993. He was the third son of Alfonso the 13th. But it was Juan's son, Carlos, who Francisco Franco ends up naming, or Francisco Franco ends up naming as his heir, Juan Carlos. But he says that's only going to happen when I die. So Juan Carlos is the grandson of Alfonso the 13th. So he tries to bring back the monarchs, and the House of Bourbon will end up coming back. So all you need to know there is that rules that goes down in 1969 when Francisco Franco names Juan Carlos as his heir. And then next after him, with the succession rules go as smoothly. Juan Carlos had a son named Felipe, who would now be, he looks familiar to probably some of you guys, a lot of you guys. He is now second in line to the throne, although he was born in 1968, so he's only a year old this time, Felipe. And he is actually the current king of Spain. So, you'll see what happens there. So, Francisco Franco, the dictador, El Dictador, El Dictador ends up ruling until 1975 when he dies. The fascist dictatorship comes to an end. So he dies in 1975, so now the Bourbons are back on the throne. And Juan Carlos becomes king, Juan Carlos the First. Now, Juan Carlos is actually still alive. Okay? He's still kicking. This guy's still kicking. It's kind of crazy. He's like, I think he's 84, 85 years old at this point. Pretty crazy. But his son Felipe is now the heir, and then the second heir is his daughter, who I think her name is, who is the daughter of Juan Carlos? I think it's, Alejandra. That's what I mean. Infanta Cristina of Spain, or Elena. I think it's Elena. This is Elena. Which either one of those two, she's now second in line to the throne after Felipe, her brother. Now, Spain is still male preference primogeniture, so it doesn't matter. She's actually older than Felipe, but since male preference primogeniture, he takes precedence. So that all holds true for the rest of the 1900s. So Juan Carlos is going to take us into 2000, and in 2005, Felipe, his son, has a daughter named Leonora. She's currently 18 years old and is now the heir to the Spanish throne. So Felipe the Sixth, Felipe never has any kids, or never has any sons. So Leonora is now second in line to the throne after Felipe the Sixth. Felipe, his son Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos ends up ruling until 2014. In 2014, he abdicates. So then Felipe, his son, comes in as Felipe the Sixth. He has a second son, or not son. He has a second daughter named Sofia, Princesa, who is now. She was born in 2007, which is the same year I was born, so she's the same age as me. Is now second in line to the throne. So she's 16 years old now, and then his eldest daughter is 15 or 18 years old. So they're about like my age-ish. So pretty cool. So 2015. So the succession stays the same for the rest of the 2010s until we get to modern day 2023. So Felipe the Sixth brings us all the way into there. So I think I'm about a month older than Princesa Sofia over there. But anyway, so still part of the House of Bourbon. A good thing to know is now when Felipe VI dies, his daughter will become queen, and in theory, just because this happens, he's still part of the House of Bourbon, but his daughter here, once she becomes queen regnant, she will be the last monarch from the House of Bourbon, because whoever she ends up marrying, that person, her kids, will take the consort's surname instead of Bourbon because she's a woman. That's just how it ends. So she will be the last monarch from the House of Bourbon. Now she is Leonora is the heir presumptive, because it's possible that Felipe VI could have a son, although very unlikely because he's in his 50s. I don't know if he'd have another son or not. But if he did, he would bypass her in the line of succession, just because of the male preference primogeniture rules. But that most likely won't happen. So she will be the last monarch from the House of Bourbon to rule Spain, whenever that ends up happening. So Felipe VI is now King of Spain, with the heirs being his two daughters, Leonora and Sofia. So that is a complete look at the Spanish line of succession. Line of succession to the Spanish throne from 1469 to 2023. As you can tell, in the past 200 years or so, there were a lot of shakeups in the monarchy, but we'll see if it continues, and it seems like it's going pretty strong. I'm a big fan of the Spanish monarchy. I find the history of it to be very interesting. So it's ended up to today. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and be sure to smash the like button, comment, like, and subscribe, as usual. Let me know what you think, and which, if you enjoyed, and who is your favorite Spanish monarch and why. With that, and all everybody smash that like button for Carlos II, for his glorious chin. If it, I feel so bad for that guy. But just out of your sorrow for Carlos II having to live his life in misery like that, smash the like button. Bye. Wow.